Will the behavior of mobile phone manufacturers to clear their chip inventory will aggravate the oversupply of chips?
In the case of Apple, I believe that's more of a cost thing than an industry supply thing, because the chip size isn't too much larger. It's a similar process technology, but the RAM, going LPDDR5 versus LPDDR4X is much more expensive. And so I think Apple was doing it for a cost reason, not a oversupply reason. But overall, that does contribute to a slower ramp and a slowdown in the business, right? Is people having to deal with lower end market demand, especially in the low end and the mid range. And then stacked on top is that they have excess inventory. And so this excess inventory means you stop purchasing for a time, and that flows through to the IC vendors and suppliers. And so some IC suppliers have already had to pay penalties for giving back capacity, right? It's not just they reduced their capacity orders, or they went from needing more capacity to not needing more capacity. Some have actually had to pay penalties for reducing their capacity already. For example, Qorvo in the radio front end department, because smartphone vendors have stopped ordering. And so they have extra front end 5G chips. And then that knocks into the foundries who now have who are not at full utilization, right? Every foundry has been at near 100% utilization or 100% utilization for almost 2 years now. But recently we've started to see SMIC is now at 96%, and many others are falling. They're not at 100% anymore. And so the question is, how low will they go? Will they stop turning such a profit because they're no longer at 100%? What happens in that? What shakes out in that market?
As more and more phones use 5G chips, why are 4G chips in short supply?
When they're supply constrained, they shift up into the more expensive, high margin products. So if you have the capacity, then you're going to allocate all of that to the highest margin product. And so that was the 5G chips. And as 5G, as the slowdown happened, there's now not as much of a demand for those 5G chips. And there was a big undersupply of 4G, right? That was the part of the market that had the biggest undersupply in the smartphone industry, was 4G, because everyone deprioritized it due to profits. And now, though, I don't believe there's much of an undersupply in 4G chips anymore. That has been corrected, as of recently, as the 5G chips got, some of them reallocated to 4G, their supply, and some others. The weakening in the demand for the low-end smartphone is the strongest, right? So that's the slowdown in supply, and the weakness is most prevalent here.
We know that smartphone manufacturers are trying to use their own chip in their product. Is the current overcapacity good news for these manufacturers?
So I think the foundries have a unique relationship with their largest customers, and two of the four largest companies in the world for semiconductors are MediaTek and Qualcomm. And MediaTek and Qualcomm have very close relationships with TSMC and Samsung. So TSMC and Samsung have lower utilization rates due to a slowdown. TSMC hasn't seen it yet, but they might begin to start discounting wafers. But those discounts are going to go to everyone, right? They're not going to prioritize Google or Vivo or Oppo any more than they would prioritize MediaTek and Qualcomm. And in fact, the biggest customers generally are the ones that get the biggest discounts. TSMC ended a lot of their volume discounts during the shortages, where larger customers paid 10 or 20% less. They ended that during the shortages. And now, with the shortages ending, it's possible that these discounts will come back, but only for the largest customers. And those largest customers will then decide to build larger chips, rather than risking that capacity on a new customer or a small customer that hasn't proved their volume yet. So it could be possible that it's easier for Vivo and Oppo and Google to build their own SoCs with foundries, but it's also very likely that they will not receive as good of a deal as MediaTek and Qualcomm, as MediaTek and Qualcomm have generally had larger volume discounts.